I'm currently in the process of re-uploading some of my older videos in order to make them more compliant with YouTube's policies on reused content. So here are my thoughts on Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep as they were originally presented back in 2019.
In my review for It Chapter 2, I stated how I believed that It was the best Stephen King adaptation ever committed to film. Well, I should clarify that statement by saying it's the best of Stephen King's horror genre, since classic dramas like The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption are excellent pieces of cinema. I also said something to the effect of, fuck The Shining. Well, though I don't exactly love the film, my opinion on the movie isn't exactly that harsh. I just think the story and pacing of the narrative can be quite meandering. Other than that, the performances and direction and the soundtrack are all excellent. You just have to get through a sluggishly boring story to get there. And after seeing Dr. Sleep, I think I wouldn't mind taking another swing at watching the Torrance family's first trip to the Overlook Hotel. Dr. Sleep doesn't provide a whole bunch of new context, but since The Shining is so ambiguous in nature, I wouldn't mind seeing it again after having some new light shed on the story. So Danny Torrance is all grown up now, but he's still haunted by his experiences from the Overlook. As an adult, he finds himself becoming more and more like his father, growing angry and suppressing his feelings with alcohol. To make peace with himself, he finally finds a job at a hospice where he comforts people before they die. There he becomes known as Dr. Sleep. Of course, he has mainly suppressed his shining ability after all these years, but he must shine again when he is psychically connected to a little girl named Abra. I know that sounds like a lot of information, but that is a basic synopsis of the book this film is based on, so you don't have to worry much about spoilers. Unless you didn't want to know anything going into this movie, in which case, sorry. But this brings me to an interesting point, because the movie Dr. Sleep is simultaneously trying to act as a faithful adaptation to Stephen King's novel and be a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's iconic film, a film which infamously disregarded a lot of aspects in Stephen King's work. So Dr. Sleep plays a delicate balancing act of trying to respect both mediums. And for the most part, it works. Now, I've never read Dr. Sleep, and I've never even read The Shining, but that should come as no surprise because I've openly admitted to not enjoy reading plenty of times on this channel. But with that being said, I think Dr. Sleep works best when it's trying to be a faithful adaptation of Stephen King's novel, more so than when it tries to be a sequel to The Shining. And I only say that because I enjoyed all of the new elements introduced to this film. I liked the new villains and the powers they possessed. I liked Abra and her place in this story. And most of all, I liked Danny's place in this story and seeing where he is mentally after all this time. But I did not love when the film tried too hard to connect to its predecessor. Dr. Sleep leans very heavily on visual nostalgia, and though I did like certain visual nods, after a while, it got a little tiresome. There's even a point in the movie where visual cues are just shoved down your throat. Everything you remember about The Shining just gets thrown at you all at once, and that was a little overbearing. Plus, Mike Flanagan even tries to mimic Kubrick's directorial style with symmetrical shots and slow fade-out transitions, and while I do understand that he's visually trying to connect the two films, I mean, no one can do Kubrick like Kubrick, but I actually think Flanagan was a good choice to helm this film. He has a great track record, and I loved his last movie, Gerald's Game, which was another Stephen King adaptation, and a great film no less. So aside from visually referencing Kubrick's work on The Shining, how does Flanagan fare with Dr. Sleep's narrative? Well, he does fine. The first act of this movie felt very disjointed to me. There were 3 storylines going on at once, and I have no idea why. We basically have 2 separate protagonists, and we spend a lot of time with our antagonist, which gives us Danny, Abra, and Rose the Hat. And though I liked Abra a lot, and I even liked Rose the Hat, I have no idea why Danny Torrance isn't the sole character behind the story being told. he should be the driving force behind the entire narrative, not just one of 3 main characters. By squeezing his story in between 2 other plot lines, his journey felt like it was rushed through. We get to see Danny in 3 different phases in his life just within the first 20 minutes of the movie. And though I thought each look into his life brought something interesting to the table, these phases weren't really given enough time to be explored individually. Again, this is mainly only an issue with the first act. Once all of the storylines intertwine into one singular narrative, I enjoyed the story being told and the pacing of it a lot better. Mainly because all of our characters had one singular mission to accomplish. And it was interesting watching Danny actively try and do something. He has something to set his mind toward in this film. This is the same Danny who doesn't seem to have any sense of agency as a little kid in The Shining after all. Things just sort of happen to him. And though he starts off in Dr. Sleep as being a bit passive, it was satisfying watching him become a more active character throughout the narrative. Again, this is why I wish we got to spend more personal time with Danny. I want to see him confront his demons, both figurative and literal. See, one of my biggest issues with The Shining is that it feels quite meandering. The characters don't really have a goal in mind. We just watch as Jack Nicholson slowly loses his mind, and thanks to the pacing and editing, we start to slowly lose our minds with him. But in Dr. Sleep, the characters have purpose, and I enjoyed that, even if it took a while for the movie to get me to that purpose. The film starts in the second act is what I'm trying to say, once Danny sets out on his goal. But I've said enough about the movie and its characters without mentioning the acting. Ewan McGregor is one of my favorite actors of all time. Well, because he's Obi-Wan Kenobi, come on now. And I really enjoyed his interpretation of an older Danny Torrance. Everyone is praising Rebecca Ferguson, and while I definitely thought she was good, I don't think she was as much of a scene stealer as everyone is claiming her to be. I honestly thought that praise might be given to Kylie Curran? The little girl who plays Abra. She was very good and added a youthful optimism to a film that was otherwise filled with cynical adults. And everyone else in the supporting cast was fine. Zahn McClarnon, Cliff Curtis, Emily Aylan Lind, they're all fine. None of them really stood out to me though, and I'm not sure if it was their individual performances or the direction they were given or what. No one gives an infamous performance like Shelley Duvall, and no one is as iconic as Jack Nicholson. But I mean, come on, you knew no one would ever be able to compare to Jack. I think Flanagan knew this as well, but it's interesting to see that he still tried to recreate some of... Well, I won't spoil exactly what he does, because that's part of the fun. But I'm just saying, you can't recreate certain aspects of The Shining without the original people involved. The third act does try to recreate a lot of familiar elements, but thankfully, it introduces a lot of brand new ideas as well. And as a result, the climax reaches a beautiful crescendo that I think will satisfy both old and new fans. But it also leaves me with one question. If the Overlook Hotel has some agency of its own, does that rob Jack Torrance from his own free will? As in, he shouldn't be considered a bad guy since he was merely under the influence of the hotel? I don't know. I hope that's not the case, but it's interesting to think about. You know, when I first realized they were making a sequel to The Shining, I was actually quite excited, believe it or not. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a fan of Mike Flanagan, and thought he was a great choice to tackle this subject matter. So, I was hoping this was going to be another Blade Runner 2049 situation. I respect Blade Runner, but I don't really like it personally. And when Denis Villeneuve brought us a sequel decades later, I fell in love with it. I honestly believe 2049 is better than its predecessor, so I came into Dr. Sleep believing I would enjoy it more than The Shining, but I'm not exactly sure if I can make that assertion just yet. See, I was going to review The Shining before seeing Dr. Sleep, and I was gonna throw it in like an older movie review playlist, like how I did for Gojira when Godzilla King of the Monsters came out earlier this year, but I'm honestly glad I didn't do that. With all of the new information I was given, I want to give The Shining another chance. Knowing how certain things will eventually play out, and having some vague answers to certain ambiguities, I wouldn't be surprised if I found myself enjoying the film a little more than I originally did. At the end of the day, I'm happy with my experience of going back to the Overlook Hotel, and that's coming from someone who didn't fully enjoy The Shining, so it'll be interesting to see how hardcore fans may take the new material. I just wish I loved it more like how I love Blade Runner 2049. And while I think Blade Runner does leave enough room open for another sequel, despite being a box office bomb, I think The Shining world can be put to rest. Little Danny Torrance deserves some sleep. And I would probably give Dr. Sleep 3 3/4 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching.